My basic philosophy revolves around common sense and social justice, which is why I want to share with you my thoughts on the election I have just witnessed. I left the election count a humbled man. 100 votes is a definite vote of no confidence. Second from the last in a lineup of individuals, many of whom were little known and little advertised, yet received more votes than myself. I was not ashamed, as I knew I ran a fair campaign with just cause, having spoken out about corruption and putting my personal life, career and business on the line, resulting in personal hardship, damage to my healthcare business and continuous online interference, which played havoc with my IT career and which the local Gardaí had no interest whatsoever in investigating, despite irrefutable proof. So, if the electorate spoke in this way, then I, for one, intended to respect that voice, whether or not I agreed with it. I put it down to perhaps not being particularly liked, but this did not tally with my experience of well wishes I warmly received from several people in my community. When asked how I did, I smiled and shrugged it off, not really too bothered about my defeat. In fact, I joked in the count with others when asked that I didn't have a chance. So apart from being stunned and extending my congratulations to some of the elected members, as well as a post of congratulations on my Facebook page, that was the sum total of my reaction. To be completely honest, when I entered the hall that morning, I felt a sense of foreboding in my stomach, as the weight of the responsibility that might lie ahead bore down on me. I had only decided in the week the election was called to stand, as I knew I would never free myself from the virtual imprisonment and interference in my life that I'm living under, until I had a voice at the heart of power. I also believed it was now or never, and that my mission was very important to the future of this country, and any hope of a united Ireland that was at peace with social justice at its heart. As I believe criminality has taken control of our institutions with the support of some members of Garda Síochána, undermining any confidence our northern brethren might have in a unified country. That is why my campaign message was simple: reform of Garda Síochána as a precursor to peaceful unification on a cost-neutral basis, through negotiation of the continuance of the institutions in Northern Ireland, in return for continued annual support of £10 to £15 billion from the UK government, to ensure peace and stability on the island of Ireland and the protection of the vulnerable who stand to be most impacted by any budgetary constraints unification might cause. I felt it was obvious I also supported the bread and butter issues that all candidates were echoing, as social justice is at my core, and so did not state them explicitly in my campaign. I also wished to live in a country I aspired to, and not one that is effectively becoming a cyber-controlled security state at the hands of organised crime. So I felt a calling and a duty to respond. It was now or never, and this was the moment, coming as it did on the heels of a lengthy post I published on Facebook from late August until the beginning of November throughout the county, summarising my experiences and events over the past 6 years, and the corruption that was running the county with the tacit support of Garda Síochána and the government. The post, entitled "Life Under Surveillance, a Constitutional Crisis," had a reach of over 55,000 with over 240,000 views, anything over 3 seconds. It was a pure coincidence that this post had been released when it was, as a date for the general election had not yet been set. Given I have made posts in 2019 on my Facebook page, www.facebook.com/AlbertDByrne, and website www.albertbyrne.ie, documenting my experiences, coupled with correspondence to Garda Síochána, GSOC and politicians, many of which have been advertised across the county, I was confident my situation was well known, as the election was on the way, and could therefore expect some level of support, depending on the importance the electorate gave to civil liberties and the impact of corruption on their daily lives. However, as I left my home that morning, I was hoping I would at least receive enough votes to secure the expenses I had incurred. I did not entertain any sense of certainty in what lay ahead. My rationale for believing I would at least recover my expenses was as follows. 3 sitting TDs were out of the race, and I have been in communication repeatedly with the electorate since the last general election, and by now should be well known. I also believed in the decency of people who would wish to express their outrage at the blatant corruption and abuse I have been subjected to for the past 15 years, particularly in the past 6 years. I have no doubt there are hundreds of people who sympathise from personal experience with my situation and would welcome my forthright message and the opportunity to express their outrage through the ballot box. I also believe the straight manner in which I have been forthright in my views and the documented way I have exposed GSOC and the government's complicity, as well as members of Garda Síochána, would at least give me some preferential votes, if not primary votes. Yet, I saw little or no preferential votes, and practically no first preferences as I walked around the hall during the count of 63,735 valid votes. It was as if I was wiped out electorally. I was in shock. What struck me most about the election count was how easy it was to walk into the restricted area without being challenged, with nobody on duty to man the door. Accidentally, I entered by the back way, as there was no parking at the front, and we were instructed to park behind the building. Once I realised I was in the actual counting area, I turned around and left. What I also found most interesting was the repair of votes with sellotape, where the creases in the votes had been almost severed entirely, as if by a sharp knife along both creases, as if somehow the ballot paper had been pulled at high velocity through a machine and in the process the creases became severed. I don't know how else one can explain a ballot paper being folded and walked approximately 3 meters to a ballot box, then becoming cleanly uniformly severed 85% of the way along both folds. One might be forgiven in thinking I'm a sore loser. In fact, the opposite is true. I had made up my mind after the last general election not to run again. I had no desire to be a politician, as I detest lies. I'm also not willing to compromise when it comes to fundamental human rights, which is why I gave my support during the apartheid years in setting up an A-level chemistry department on the border with South Africa to offer multiracial education in response to the apartheid regime. It is also why I set up an internationally recognised website, www.myiboga.com, in 2004, which has been on the continual attack, detailing a highly effective but little known treatment for chemical dependency, using ibogaine, derived from the root bark of a West African shrub Tabernanthe boga, which I encountered as part of a West African initiation ritual I underwent. This same substance can cure physical dependency to opioids in 36 hours, and the total alkaloid extract can cure benzodiazepine dependency, leaving the individual as right as rain with a sense of total freedom, a restoration of human dignity. It is these experiences that have inspired me on returning home after many years overseas to speak out against corruption in support of a just society that develops the human spirit, not crushes it. It is also why I am unable to accept the status quo in Ireland, as I find it demeaning, antiquated, and those who enforce it fascist in their behaviour, as they seek to intimidate individuals into submission and are a principal cause of oppression in Irish society. Given that my education and work career have evolved around observation and problem solving, the same skills that have caused me so many difficulties in politics, along with my experience in other areas such as providing treatments to individuals with chemical dependency, I think it's reasonable to say I have developed strong skills in observation and deduction, and I'm quite streetwise. Which is why, having had some time to digest my stunning defeat, I now find myself in a state of incredulity. Clearly, I had been in a state of shock and unable to process what had taken place. It seems to me the more daring the exploit, the more numb we are to its occurrence. And it is this principle, I believe, that is well known to those who practice this deceit. That said, I'm not accusing anyone in particular. Of course, having the largest number of candidates on the ballot sheet clearly did not benefit independents that ran, as it split the vote. However, many of the independent candidates did not invest in publicity. I, on the other hand, spent in excess of 2K on Facebook and Instagram advertising, despite indications of Facebook advertising interference, along with posters in every locality and a half-page spread in the draw of the leader during election week. That apart from my appearance in the Dog FM and several write-ups in the local papers across County Louth. Again, this did not entitle me to be given votes, but it would at the very least be fair to say my candidacy was common knowledge and built on a sound premise that had previously been extensively publicised. So yes, I seriously question the results of this election, as I believe corruption is deeply embedded in county politics. It clearly is not to the benefit of the government to act as they shoehorn their candidates into position and thus hold on to power. If this election interference is being conducted throughout the country and individuals are being targeted, such as myself, through the spreading of libelous misinformation within their communities, where all else fails, then I have to ask, how legitimate is our government, that so many of us feel do not represent change, despite it being a slogan, as they have had a monopoly in power along with special interests since the founding of the state? I believe the time has come to move to electronic voting systems, as the paper ballot only serves the interests of those who wish to subvert democracy and maintain the status quo. In 2009, when I ran for election for Louth County Council, a classmate of mine from primary school swaggered out of Tenanty's pub in RD, came up to me with an air of disdain and told me I was a Garda informant, which I found to be quite amusing. The lies have only grown greater the more of a threat I have become. We need to introduce classes on misinformation to our youth as a first step in tackling corruption in society, which is only going to worsen as technology advances, as is done in Finland, so as to help them navigate the deceit that is at the heart of corruption in our society, and to recognise misinformation online and in the community. Of course, some want to believe in misinformation as it feeds their own personal agenda. I do believe my presence in the Dáil would have exposed the depth of corruption in our county and would have reverberating effects for the country at large, as I have intimate knowledge of how these corrupt schemes are operating, and would easily expose the subjugation of civil liberties and democratic voice to the country at large. I believe it was important to criminal elements in our political and law enforcement services to discredit and humiliate me. A good showing on my part would have highlighted the issues I have been raising and would be a threat to the status quo and to exposing criminality in our political and civil life. However, I believe the Irish people are beginning to wake up to what is happening. I also believe this election represents a step backwards for unification, as it illustrates the corruption that undermines our democracy and sends a warning message to our northern brethren that unification with the South will come with a democratic deficit and a denial of the right to shape one's own future unless one is willing to emigrate. Not to mention, it insinuates the electorate in the Republic do not attach much importance to civil liberties or corruption. I believe it's becoming more and more apparent we are not yet mature enough as a democracy to match the maturity of the democratic process in Northern Ireland, which has been hard won through blood, sweat and tears. One does wonder, is change simply a campaign slogan to enable the status quo, Or is it something we really believe in if we are to mature as a society to reach our highest potential? Reform of An Garda Síochána is a necessary first step towards unification, as it is twisted by some to serve as an instrument of oppression and not a guarantor of personal rights and freedoms. I am only too aware of those who serve with dignity and compassion and are a credit to the community, who I know are also crying out for change and ready for the challenge, one which must be organic and holistic and accounts for all actions by members on the force. I am also impressed and relieved by how in these past months my personal situation has come under control, though not completely, and for that I say thank you to An Garda Síochána, even if they have not yet acknowledged the situation, as I have no doubt it is due to their intervention. In signing off, I would like to pose the following question. What do these 100 votes awarded to me at the ballot box represent? Are they a reflection of myself? Are they a reflection of the 63,735 voters in County Louth, including my own community, who are only too aware of what I have endured these past 6 years? Or are they a reflection of the criminality that seeks to control and silence anyone who speaks out against the status quo, such as myself, who has endured ongoing torture and interference in his business, career and personal life? I will leave that question for you to decide. I know I have made up my mind. Thank you for listening.